Hello, I'm Father George Salzman. I'd like to tell you a story about one of Harvard's most beloved faculty members, Professor William Alfred. He really was to Harvard College its Mr. Chips. We're right outside his home here at 31 Athens Street, right down from St. Paul's. I would see him a lot and walk through into Harvard Yard with him many a time. We're back out and many conversations. I remember once upon a time there's a famous Alec Guinness film, Ealing Studios, Kind Hearts and Coronets, where somebody at the bottom of the succession tries to bump off all the others so he gets the inheritance. Alec Guinness plays all the people, male and female, in the family. And I asked him about that. This was pre-Google, so he had Professor Alfred as a resource. And he said to me, oh, that's Tennyson, that's Lady Clara Vere de Vere. Kind hearts are more than coronets, and simple faith than Norman Blood. He was a great resource. He was a great teacher. You'd see him often pictures of him in either the Crimson or the Gazette with a class in hysterics as you would imitate Mrs. Micawber. I'll never leave you, Micawber. Of course, what's he going to do with all those kids and so on? So he was much beloved. Tommy Lee Jones said that he was the best teacher he ever had. So did Stockard Channing, so did John Lithgow. And he was not only a great teacher, but a good mentor. If kids came to trouble, they would sometimes come and see him here, or their parents who'd had Professor Alfred in class would say, why don't you go see Bill Alfred? And Bill Alfred would chat with them and let them talk about things concerning them, make them tea. If they really got the dean angry and blotted their copybook, he'd make them dinner and take their mind off things. And he was a marvelous mentor to so many different people. He once said to me, we're a bit like St. Joseph. We're really their foster parents, which indeed we all are. He went to the 8 o'clock Mass every day, and he'd leave early, not just because he had class, but he'd leave earlier than that, because he had the homeless waiting for him in the back of church, and would give them not a few dollars each, and was beloved by them. And then he had many different things he did. He wrote poetry. He was a great friend of Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell. Archibald MacLeish said he was the best thing to happen to Harvard since the Second World War, in which Bill Alfred was, of all things, a tank commander. You might not think of that when you saw him in his trench coat and the old hat, gently along the street with the students. He also was a playwright, and he really hit a jackpot when he came up with a play, Hogan's Goat, that was the play of the year off Broadway, and in that, an unknown actress became a famous star, Faye Dunaway, and she became a famous star there. So sometimes Faye Dunaway would stay over here and show up with him to the 8 o'clock Mass. As I say, he mentored students. One of the ones, speaking of films, was Chris O'Hare, who told me that he would visit Bill Alfred, and they were walking down the street one day, and Bill said, well, what would you do if you could do anything? And he said, well, I'd really like to be involved in films, and now Chris O'Hare is a notable film director in London. He said, think of it, I never asked myself that question. So he was a marvelous, really helped people think, not simply about what they were doing, but about their lives as a whole. I could tell you a quick story. He was coming to church, and he dashed across the street, and he was hit by a truck and thrown through the air. Mercifully, it was winter. He had a heavy overcoat on, and I guess that helped him. I left Mass and dashed up after Mass to Stillman Infirmary, and there I saw him right there as I came out of the elevator. And he was on a gurney with the old hat and a Victor Hugo book there. And so at that point, the young doctor came out with a clipboard, sort of in a rush. And so I moved up to his head on the gurney, and she's at the bottom, and she says, well, who are the next of kin? He said, I have nobody. And then he turned to me and he said, well, we better tell Faye. She's sure to be told and be worried. So I said, oh, that's a good idea. So the doctor's presenter and says, well, who's Faye? Okay, who's Faye? And he says, Faye Dunaway. Well, Faye Dunaway then was one of those famous actresses. At that point, the doctor's face had a smile that was so big it went around the back of the head. And if her head were a melon, it would be in two pieces on the plate. It was one of the funniest things. So I said, no, Faye often stays with the professor, and he helped her become a star. You hear her say on TV that she was opening a play in Boston because her mentor, Professor William Alfred, was there. The church was packed with the good and the great from all over for his funeral, and Peter Wolf of the J. Giles Band was the first reader, and Faye Dunaway obviously the second. And it was fascinating to chat with people about the impact that he had, not only their learning, but also on their lives. I remember talking to a seemingly hard-boiled professor a year later, and he was in tears telling me, I never realized all the sides to his life, because when he came in, there were rows of the homeless. The word had gone out all over Cambridge and Somerville and Brighton and Boston, and there were rows of the homeless who were present and moved us all dearly at his funeral. He said once that he thought that we were all a bit like St. Joseph, whether priests or teachers, that we were all foster parents to the kids, and he really indeed was that. He really knew what life was for, and he really knew that it was for helping other people. And indeed, he captured exactly what Tennyson meant in that final line of Lady Clara Vere de Vere, kind hearts are more than coronets, and simple faith than Norman blood. God bless you. God bless him.